Hey guys, Josh Hankin here, created the DVRT Ultimate Sandbag Core Training Systems along with physical therapist Jessica Bento. So good to be back. Great to going to be giving you some brand new information. DVRT, moving better, feeling better. What we want to go over is I've been getting a lot of questions again about hip hinging. So hip hinging is a fundamental movement we do when we jump, when we pick something up off the ground. It's even involved in locomotion to some degree. So it's something we need to learn, and the common compensation in hip hinging is squatting. Now people automatically think the solution to hinging is deadlifting. We're going to show you why that may or may not be the case, but also some alternatives to get people to hinge correctly. Because there could be some reasons that people aren't hip hinging right, and they're not making the right progressions in their training. Now you notice I'm starting Jessica on the ground because for a lot of the people that we're working with, they just simply have no idea how to even activate their posterior chain, their glutes, their hamstrings, and some of the other musculature that help extends our hips in the hip hinge. So if Jessica demonstrates a basic glute bridge, there's a lot of you out there, whether trainers or yourself, that when you do this, you feel this in your low back. So for one of the first things we want to do is make sure people are cueing, pushing in the ground and actually holding tension in the lower part of their pelvis. Because in the hip hinge, we have not only the movement of the hip as far as what's happening in the hamstring glutes, but also the plank of the body, of the trunk. So when people go in this big extension of the low back, they miss a lot of the other stuff and cause a lot of problems. I'm not going to go over all the glute bridge variations possible. There's hundreds of them. But I want to go over one in particular because the tendency nowadays is to load heavier and heavier weight in the glute bridge. And that's not really the most beneficial thing, because when I walk, it's not load upon my frame that causes me to compensate. It's the inability to stabilize and integrate other muscles in more planes of motion. I'll show you what I mean. So a great drill to do is Jessica starts into a single leg bridge. So go ahead and bend the knee to keep the short lever arm. Go ahead and bend the knee to have a short lever arm. If she goes ahead and comes up, what I can do is I can start doing a marching bridge. So keep her hips elevated. She's going to slowly lower this foot down while keeping her hips elevated and go the other side. And what we're starting to do is keep the hips elevated the entire time, is build some very fundamental locomotion concepts that when she walks, that she doesn't over-rotate or compensate for lack of stability in both the trunk and the hips and the hamstrings in her hip hinge. That's a thing that's really important, because when we get her standing now, in something like a deadlift, you don't get that lateral instability, which is so fundamental to functional movement and what we do in everyday life. So let's talk about the deadlift. So if Jessica grabs a kettlebell, a lot of people do kettlebell deadlifts, and there's nothing inherently wrong with a kettlebell deadlift. But if Jessica does a couple of just two-handed kettlebell deadlifts, one of the toughest things about doing a kettlebell deadlift is the fact that our hands end up close. So we get a little bit more in that flexion. It's harder to create extension in the trunk. Remember I said that the hip hinge is as much as what's happening in the trunk and the upper body as what's happening in the lower body. You have a connection, your lat, that connects your lower body and upper body. It's very, very unique in that manner. So we want to sort of open up the body and get in a better position. So that's one reason we use the ultimate sandbag. So if Jessica goes to the ultimate sandbag, so what we see in the hip hinge now is, see how her hips are back upon her legs, her knees are bent, her elbows are away from her knees. So now when she stands tall, she gets a very nice vertical position. She's able to lock in and create tension in the torso. Create tension in the torso allows her to move more freely in the hips. Let's come back down. Now, right there in of itself, I've seen the Ultimate Sandbag deadlift fix literally hundreds of hip hinge problems. But let's say it's not clicking for you or your client for one reason or another. A lot of it will have to do with the upper body. There's some people, a good friend of mine, Steve DeTomaso and Carrie McGrath, asked me about this kettlebell exercise. Jessica grabs a kettlebell again, and she grabs it by the horns, and she pushes it into her stomach, and sort of tries to use the load of the kettlebell to lead her and give her some tactile feedback into a hip hinge. We have another hip hinge here. Now, not a bad exercise. You're not going to get necessarily hurt, But what we're losing here is a couple things. One is you better be strong in that upper body for a lot of people, because it's hard to make that connection and keep that downward bracing of the torso. Secondly, that lever arm is right in that center of mass, so you almost physically have to pull it into your body, which is awkward and causes sometimes flexion of the torso when you do the exercise. A better option is if we go back to that ultimate sandbag and we go to a front load good morning position. So by going automatically to our standing plank, we're integrating the tension principles that we want in a good hip hinge. She's able to pull the bag apart, create that nice torso where really her hips have the only option to go back. I can get immediate feedback when she's in this position. If the elbows don't move from their position, and if she keeps tension between the shoulder blades, she drives through their feet. It's a much stronger position, which reinforces the integration of the torso with the hips and the upper back and wax chest. So really try that front load good morning. If you really focus on the intent of the upper body, the bracing of the torso, you'll find that it solves about 99.9% of your hip hinge problems. For the rest of them, make sure to check out our blog at DVRT Fitness and see how you can keep making progressions through the movement system.